me, I'm Craig Phipps with KSA. I'm the aviation practice director for our engineering, planning, and architectural services, and I'm honored to moderate this conversation with colleagues with your regulatory and grant funding agencies. We have an esteemed panel of FAA and state aviation officials who are excited to discuss a variety of topics that impact the aviation industry in the Southwest region of the FAA and across the nation. I want to thank the South Central chapter for hosting this conversation. As a 30-year member of the aviation community and 20-year member of the chapter, I appreciate their efforts to advance aviation and the aviation profession. Mr. Carl Newman, when he was the chairman of AAAE, once spoke about the partnership between the FAA, state aviation, airport officials, consultants, vendors, et cetera, and mentioned what a great partnership that is. And these conversations hosted by the chapter are a great example of that partnership. And I know that we are all very appreciative of the chapter. So just a couple of housekeeping items. If you're not muted, if you would please mute yourself to cut down on any background noise. And second, we've got quite a few participants. And so I think the easiest way to ask questions or comments would be through the chat feature. Chris Monroe will be checking that and bringing any questions to my attention. So with that, I'd like to go through and introduce our panel and have them introduce themselves, really. And so we'll start with Stacy Swigert, and I hope I got your last name correct. The Regional Finance Programs Manager with FAA Southwest Region's Airport Division. If you could just introduce yourself and a little bit about your background and what you're hoping to convey in this conversation.
Thank you so much. Yes, Swigert is correct. Thank you. I'm Stacy Swigert. As Craig said, I'm with the FAA's Southwest Airports Division. I stutter a little bit. I've been in this job for just over a year. I was at headquarters previously, working in the FAA's DC office, also in the Office of Airports. Prior to my coming here, my primary job there was legislation. So what you saw a lot in the 2018 reauthorization was work that I had done with other colleagues in the Office of Airports, providing technical assistance to congressional offices. And some of it was a little chaotic, as I'm sure we've all seen with the FAA reauthorization bill in 2018, hoping things are a little smoother this time around. But one of the things that we tend to focus on a lot, at least in my position and what I'm trying to bring to the region, is going back to our statutory requirements. So what is it that we are required to do by law? What is our regulatory requirements? Those are the things that law tells us, obviously, to promulgate. And then where are we on policy and what can we do on that end to be more efficient? So with our recent appropriations coming out, there's a couple of new changes that as we go through this program today, if anything new comes up, I'll certainly point them out. But in the meantime, just glad to be here in the Southwest region and glad to be here with you guys today.
Thank you. We'll turn it over to Jane Lucero.
Hi, everybody. It's good to see all my friends and familiar faces. Jane Lucero, the Planning and Programming Manager for the New Mexico Department of Transportation, and just happy to be on this call. I learned it's nice to see Jim and Grayson and Mike, because I don't talk to you guys enough, so I actually learn a lot from you guys on this call, and I'm looking forward to the conversation. So Happy New Year, everybody.
Thank you, Jane. Grayson.
Grayson Arties, Director for the Oklahoma Aeronautics Commission, and you're right, Jane, I don't see you all or talk to you all enough as I should. So glad to have these conversations. Looking forward to the continued collaboration in the Southwest region, and I think we do it better than just about anybody else in the country. So let's keep that top spot moving forward.
Very good. Thank you. And Jim.
All right. Good afternoon. Jim Halley, Director of Planning and Programming for TechSide Aviation. And I'll reiterate that, it's definitely good for us to all get on here. And I think we all have a lot of things to share and learn from each other. So excited for today and appreciative of being asked to participate.
Thank you, Jim. And then finally, Mike Burrows from Louisiana.
Mike Burrows, Assistant Director of Aviation for Department of Transportation and Development. I'm looking forward to the conversation. I know I wasn't able to attend the first one. I think it was back in June, but I'm looking forward to this conversation now.
Very good. Thank you so much. We're going to jump into questions. Like I said, I have a few questions prepared as the moderator, but I'm hoping that we'll get questions from the audience as well. And Chris Monroe will be checking for those. So first question, and I think we'll go roundtable, but I'm going to throw it to Stacy to start with, related to funding. So what is next for Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, IIJA, aka Bipartisan Infrastructure Law? And what does your crystal ball say about issuing of grants? And has your agency issued any IIJA grants to date? And then there'll be a follow-up as to who will be administering those grants. So quite a bit there, but if you could jump into that, Stacy, appreciate it.
Absolutely. Okay, so I won't go too deep into the details unless you guys want me to. So I'm gonna start high. If you want more, just tell me. I can get into way too many weeds. So IIJA, which has been more commonly referred to as a bilateral infrastructure law, so bill, which you see on the question there, I might just revert into saying bill, so I apologize ahead of time, that's what I'm referring to. So bill basically for the Office of Airports has two primary programs, and then one of those programs has a sub-program. First, let's start with the AIG. That's the Airport Infrastructure Grant Program. These are like apportionments, right? These are the funds that airports get every year for the 5-year duration of the bill. They're actually preloaded, so you don't need an appropriations for that fiscal year because the bill was a dual purpose bill. It was approps and it was authorization. The only holdup is you have to wait until that fiscal year comes along for the money to be available. So the IAG or AIG, Airport Infrastructure Grant, again, that's your apportion funds. Those are figured out and posted usually I think the last 2 years they've done it at the end of November or December, or this past year they did it then, and that's kind of their goal to do November. Why do we have to wait? Because we have to do for the general aviation airports, it's based on, per the law, it is based on collective development, right? So whatever each asset category has in total development, it's then split among all those airports in that category. So you'll see this year, the amount for national airports actually went higher, but the amount for locals went a little bit lower. So we had some changes in the funding this year because of the number of airports in each category and the total development costs in each category. So those grants are flowing now. If you have an airport that wants their AIG money, everything's on the bill website, on the FAA's bill. It's faa.gov/bill. It's on the bill's website. They can apply for those grants. What we do encourage, though, is for airport sponsors to make sure that these programs or these projects are in their CIPs so that we can coordinate them through. Because if they're just popping up and we don't know if they have the environmental done, they still have to follow all the rules of AIP. That's what's written in the legislation. The difference is I call it PFC minus, which I was told is a little negative, so I should call it PFC or AIP plus. But really, I think PFC minus is more applicable because the way that the legislation is written for AIG money, it is targeting 49 USC 40117A3. That is only a portion of the PFC. There's no debt service, and then there's a couple other things that gets lobbed off in terms of bail. So AIG funds, apportion funds, ready to go. The sub-program under AIG is a competitive program for FAA contract towers. This is where you probably just saw that announcement closed somewhat recently, I think back December 6th. So if your airport has an FAA contract tower, this is a very small program with $20 million nationwide for improvements and whatnot on those towers. Again, it's super competitive, tiny amount of money, but sometimes we can get some good projects completed with them. The other program, so we have that's our first primary bucket. Our other one is the ATP, which is the Airport Terminal Development Program. It is competitive, and it's a formula that's in the statute. So if you're a medium or a large hub, your matching share is 80%. Large hubs, you know, they get the most amount of the money. The mediums, they're kind of, I think 15 or 20%. It's not a lot of money for mediums. Large get a ton. Smalls actually get a little bit more than mediums, believe it or not. Then the rest of the airports, the non-hubs and the remaining non-primaries are all grouped into another category. And those are competitive. Every year you have to, the airport sponsors have to apply for them. The 23 program has closed, and we've made a recommendation. So they're working their way through the Department of Transportation as we speak. We're hopeful we'll get those announced. I want to say at the end of next month, but maybe sooner. So we're just hopeful that those will come out really soon. And according to that Federal Register notice with the announcement for the funds available, you have to use your funds by July of this year. So ATP has that requirement as a selection criteria. So that's where we are with bill funding. So like I said, AIG, if you haven't used your 22, it's still available. Your 23 is now available. Your 24 will probably be available come November or so of this year. Federal Contract Tower, that the 23 is closed. 23 application program is closed. So we're actually probably going to be seeing those come through soon. And then 23 ATP is closed. Hopefully announcements in a month. And 24 ATP, the bill team tells me they're expecting to have that out by September. The NOFO will be out by September.
Thank you, Stacey. That's a lot of information. Very appreciated on all the programs there. I think for our state officials, and let's start with Jane, but on the AIG, the money that is available can apply for the grant at FAA.gov. I'm wondering how things are going in New Mexico, if y'all have issued any grants, just what you're seeing on your end.
So from our end on the AIG, I'm just going to be honest, there was a lot of confusion with our airports. No one really knew if, at least this past fiscal year, if they could, how to break it up. If they were short for money on a project, could you do it, break it up by station? Did it have to be a whole project? So in FY22, not a lot of our airports use the AIG funding. I think we had one, maybe two who did. This year in 23, what a lot of our airports are doing is either combining it so they can get a bigger project, or for those airports that need a master plan or an action plan or an ALP update or whatever, they're applying for that right now so they can get ahead of the curve for the rest of the money later on. But that's, hopefully I'm not the only state that our airports were confused, but that's kind of where we are.
Well, let's ask Grayson. Grayson, how are things going in Oklahoma?
I don't know what you're talking about, Jane. I think every one of my airports got a grant this last year. No, I'm kidding. We're in the same boat as New Mexico. I think we may have had one airport take an AIG grant, and I don't know for our part if it was so much as the confusion, but it was more just that was the prudent method, because there was bigger projects, bigger fish that were needing to be fried for Oklahoma's airports. And so this year I would suspect we're going to see at least a dozen, if not more, airports take advantage of 2 years of AIG money. But I will say a lot of the airports are kind of planning as a one big splash, or maybe two big splashes over this 5-year window, as opposed to trying to get a grant every single year. I think since the information did come out that you can, quote unquote, combine it with other federal monies, obviously how it gets mingled, how it gets administered is to be determined. But having that ability, I think, will go a long way to ensuring a healthy, successful project that doesn't have to be compartmentalized too much. So I think that information is going to be going, and I know our airports are looking forward to some of the competitive announcements that are coming about as well. So I think we're all looking forward to that. But yeah, Oklahoma, similar situation in New Mexico. Hopefully we'll have at least a dozen and a half airports take advantage of it in FY23.
All right, very good, Grayson. And want to throw it over to Mike in Louisiana and get their experience and where they stand right now.
We're the same right now as the same experience as Oklahoma and New Mexico. You know, our airports are they're looking, I guess, the overall on their CIP moving forward, and I think they're going to look at it from a combined effort, looking at a bigger project of the costs increasing as we've seen in construction. So it's just taking a lot more money. So that combined effort is gonna be beneficial moving forward.
Thank you. Very good. Very good. And save the distinguished Jim Halley for last. The block grant state, maybe a little bit different experience than other states, particularly where the airports aren't as used to applying and administering grants where the block grant state has done that. Jim, if you could kind of give us an update.
Yeah, so FAA is implementing IIJA in a way that they retain implementation authority for the GA airports in Texas. So we are working with our airports to help develop, the plans. Again, I don't think any of our GA airports have actually received their AIG grants yet, but we're identifying whether it's opportunities to supplement existing or planned projects due to rising construction costs. Or we also have a lot of airports with 182 GA airports in our program. We have a lot of projects that have gone by the wayside throughout the years because of funding constraints. And now with this influx of new funding source, it's a good opportunity for us to maybe bring some of those back to life, and those projects that are justified and eligible, but just hadn't historically competed well against safety and security and capacity projects, that we can now start to give some of those nice to have projects with the IIJA allocations. But we're committed to working with both our airports and our ADO, the Texas ADO, to assist the ADO in implementing IIJA as much as we can. So that continues to be our mission.
Okay, thank you. And would you say that for airports, regardless of state, one of the first steps is to go to FAA.gov and look at that application process, the grant application process, to see what's required and start down that road? Would that be an accurate statement?
Yeah, it's usually in the same AIP application form, the SF-424. It's the same form. So, and that's actually the same form for supplemental projects that we request as well in our notice of funding opportunities. So they're OMB named form, so we really can't deviate too much from what OMB has put its stamp on. But from working with your ADO is honestly the best thing. I'd just like to back up a second. I believe, Grayson, you were talking about the commingling of the funds. And I would definitely recommend reaching out to the ADO, because there is a proration guidance letter that has been published to talk about how to commingle AIP funds with bill funds. So that might be helpful. And we're starting to do that in some locations right now. It's a whole usable unit of work, but we can be very creative on how we get there. So we've been pretty successful in getting a couple of them off the ground with the proration.
Very good. And so probably most of the airports surrounding Texas are familiar with the SF form. It's probably new for a lot of the Texas airports, having worked through the block grant. Jim, are y'all providing assistance with that in terms of answering questions to kind of get them rolling?
We've actually been talking a lot about that. We have a couple opportunities. We have a couple ways we could skin this cat. One is we could do 182 individual lessons and teaching airports how to do it. But I think a better approach would be a statewide approach to this, and getting all of our airports together with us, because we've historically done all of that serving as agent, that we can give a few opportunities for our airports to not just learn from us, but to also have discussions with each other, obviously inviting, our ADO partners as well from the Texas ADO, but giving those statewide opportunities to basically learn how to do some of this stuff on their own. We're here obviously to assist in any way possible, whether it's, project development, collecting a lot of the information that's required, but ultimately the submission coming from the airports to the FAA directly, and anything we can do to assist in our sponsors being able to successfully complete those applications is again, something we're committed to.
We did get a great application. I think you guys must have worked with Arlington GKY for their
The terminal.
Yeah, yeah. So thank you for that.
Yeah, we had probably, I don't know, 12 or 15 last year and 22 apply for the terminal program. So, yeah, anything we can do to help.
Yeah, that was great. And we're working, yeah, and we've got the federal contract tower with New Braunfels coming in, I know, with the design. So yeah, that's just so you know, you guys did a great job with that.
Well, credit goes to the airports on those ones.
Excellent, very good. Well, hey, I appreciate the discussion. We talked about this 6 months ago. I feel like we got a whole lot more information out there, some guidance to the airport. So I appreciate everybody's input. I'm going to check with Chris Monroe. Chris, are there any comments or questions from the audience on this particular topic? You still there, Chris? We'll let him catch up. I'm going to move on to another moderator question. Jane, if you don't mind, I'd like to start with you on this one. So recently saw correspondence related to $268 million in fiscal year 2022 competitive supplemental discretionary grants. The notification indicates that grants are open to airport construction projects, associated airport capital planning, noise planning, and noise mitigation projects, and energy and environmental stability projects. It's a competitive process. What can you tell us about that, or what are you sharing with your airports as related to that?
We're telling them to go for it. Any money that's available. No, we work with, in our state, we encourage many of our larger airports that they don't have enough money for something to go after something like this. We work with them on getting all the prerequisites. If they don't have environmental, if they don't have the design, the state will fund all that ahead of time so that they compete, the airport can compete well against other airports, because we're a very small fish in a very large pond. So we try to just help our airports get as prepared as they can. And even we'll review the applications form, and our ADO has been wonderful as well. They, they got on a telecon with us and said, hey, any questions your airports have, please, have them reach out to us. So it's really been a team effort between the ADO, the state, and the airports that are applying for these projects.
Very good. Now, the notice that I saw had a little bit of a focus on airports' climate challenge and eligible projects. There seems to be a focus in that area in terms of a limited pot of money to distribute amongst 50 states. Any advice that you're giving to your airports in that area?
For the climate challenge, if you're putting in for a terminal, for example, with the ATP, as long as with this, we tell them, make sure it's LEED certified, make sure you include all the environmental requirements that were in the suggestions that were in the NOFO. We just try to have them include that within their project application. That's not the best answer, but that's
well, no, good. And I see Stacy nodding along. Stacy, is there anything that you can add to that, particularly along the climate challenge and possible focus from the administration there?
Yeah, that's actually in the legislation, the FY22 Appropriations Act for the Department of Transportation, therefore the FAA under our division, which I think was also L last year, it's L this year for sure. Anyway, under that act, where we get our additional supplemental funding, it'll give us, sometimes we get instructions in the act, sometimes we get instructions in report languages or joint explanatory statements for this particular supplemental discretionary. The new changes kind of mirrored a little bit of what we saw with Bill in terms of the climate focus. So there, as you saw in the NOFA, the Notice of Funding Opportunity that was issued at the end of December, And by the way, that closes that notice of funding opportunity. All applications have to be submitted by January 31st at 5 p.m. Eastern time. I highlight that Eastern time. Eastern, please. Let everybody know it's Eastern time, 4 p.m. Central. Big problems we had with some of the ATPs. But anyway, that is a priority. It's required by the act that we have to address those. So what you're going to see, if you've looked at the NOFO, it'll explain to you that you're in box number 2 of the SF 424. There's something that says like project type, and you fill in the type of project that it fits under, like the 7 or 8 categories that are in the NOFO. So if it's noise or, emissions or what carbon emissions and stuff like that, you would put in, and it'll tell you which letter to put in. And then in your description, just to encourage you to try to hit on some of the wording in the NOFO that will be addressed in your project. So that might make it for a little bit of a stronger application. There's always something in every project I think we can get through. Talk to your ADOs about getting, projects that you might have and getting their input. That's another option. If you have something you're like, gee, I'm not really sure, talk to your ADOs. They'll help for sure. The other item I wanted to mention is, I don't know if you guys noticed this in the NOFO. It says, so one of the House report language, the House report language that we got last year and we've been having every year for the last 3 years, tells us we have to do the supplemental funding that they give us every year has to be split right down the middle. So there's a part in a piece of legislation or in the statute under the discretionary supplemental part of discretionary in the statute 49 USC 47114. This is actually J. It tells us at least 50% of the money have to go to anybody but large and mediums. In the past couple of years, our report language has said you must maintain that 50-50 split. There's somebody in headquarters whose head's going to pop off because we have it again this year, and it's just no fun. So we are going to have to maintain that 50-50 split for 22, which is what you see in the NOFO. And you may have noticed where it says in the NOFO, I've got it up right here, that, well, we have the 547, 909, 110 minus your community projects. So it leaves that 260 something available. But because we had some more of those community earmarks were for anything below a large and medium, which took that half significantly down. So you'll only see in the NOFO, it says funding for everybody but large and medium is between 20 and 70 million. Math right now says it's closer to 20. It can go up to 70 because there's possibly some projects that were earmarked that may not proceed. So there's not a lot of money for anything small, non-hub, non-primary. It is, but here's what I always encourage. Submit an application. There's absolutely no harm in submitting an application. Give yourself that opportunity to compete. And, sometimes a project will stand out. And if it works, in the budget, it might get pulled. So I absolutely encourage everybody, if you have something that you want to try to get this funding for, you can probably make it work and apply.
Yeah, thank you. And I'll make sure I jotted this down to make sure that I have it right. You're saying roughly 20 to 70 million across the nation for those other than large and mediums.
Yes, if you look in the NOFO under section B, says federal award information. It's the second paragraph, the last sentence will give you that information.
Okay, very good. How about Mike? Any comments that you'd like to tag on from Louisiana?
I was just going to say that, we're similar to New Mexico. We try to have coordinated efforts with our ADO and our airports, with our program managers to, discuss with them any planning efforts moving forward. When it comes down to the NOFO, I know a lot of the discussion comes out within those planning efforts, and we try to discuss, I guess, the details, some of those things that they may have questions about on those projects moving forward.
Thank you. How about you, Jim?
Yeah, I mean, similar. We're again, you know, the NOFO is pretty, even though we're a block grant state and we know that ultimately this is AIP and we manage it, the application process is going directly to the FAA. So same thing, you know, working with our sponsors, making sure that we have all the ducks in a row, environmental, everything is good to go, and that we're putting competitive projects. You know, we've seen already our airports send to us, hey, what about these 11 things, you know, that we've been wanting for years? And it's like, well, let's kind of focus our energy on that one really great project that's going to compete well, as opposed to spraying and praying and hoping that, you know, something catches somebody's eye. So we're really trying to help our airports develop that best competitive application, like Stacy was saying, that really identifies and meets a lot of the needs in that NOFO. And I was just working with a sponsor this morning about how can we, you know, how can we put the right project forward for the right reason to meet this NOFO and really ultimately meet the intent. So.
Okay, very good. And I think that competitive process, it's good to reiterate that. And so Grayson, anything additional to add?
No, not a whole lot. I'll say, obviously, every time someone sees a number that's got 9 digits in it, they think it's going to be the world's savior. But when you split it up across 50 states and regions and, you know, GA and commercial, it really comes to a pretty minuscule amount. And I mean, a state will be lucky to get 1 project, if not 2, funded. And so that's where it's a hard conversation to have. You know, we have 108 airports. Texas has 5,000 airports. New Mexico has the amount of airports that they have. And really, it kind of comes down to figuring out what's the best, probably 5 or 6 projects you can put forth as a state that you think will maybe get down selected in the 1 or 2. We have been using supplemental discretionary since its inception in 2018 as a way to fund projects that normally wouldn't be funded through normal discretionary means. So some of those projects that aren't just at the bottom ranking, but more kind of the mid-tier. So your parallel taxiway at a smaller airport, some apron projects, maybe a secondary parallel taxiway. We've had some pretty good success with that. And honestly, you know, now that we're moving away from pure supplemental discretionary and kind of into a hybrid CDS and supplemental, we actually have been having a lot better success on the CDS side and using our congressional delegation to advocate for those special projects that we think are necessary that may not compete for traditional discretionary through traditional means. And so that's something we've had pretty good success with. And I know not every state can do that given their relationships with their congressional delegation, but we're doing pretty good here the last couple of years. And I hope that'll keep moving forward as Congress keeps deciding to put more money through either the supplemental discretionary process or community projects.
Very good. Thank you so much. I got a message from Chris Monroe that we haven't had any questions come in yet, but if anybody out there, if you have questions you want to tag in, please post them to chat and we'll be sure to bring them up with the panel. So next question, Grayson, I'm going to throw this to you. It's going to be a very broad question. Our previous conversations with colleagues with this group, we focused a little bit more on engineering type projects. And so for this one, I wanted to bring out more on the planning side. And I know Jim will be happy about that, talking about the planning side of things exactly. So it's a very general question. If you could just answer best you can, add any information that you've got. But what role do planning projects play in your state region?
So, Craig, I think you and I have had several conversations about planning projects. In my mind, the key to a planning project is right sizing the planning. What are you trying to go after? You know, a lot of airports immediately go to, oh, let's develop a master plan and see what the next 20 or 30 years of my airport's going to look like. And while a master plan is nice, it's a great, you know, document you can send for your community and your mayor and other members that surround the airport. It really can be, at the end of the day, just a really expensive paperweight. And so the question before you go into any kind of planning effort that I usually encourage sponsors to consider is what are you hoping to get out of this planning document? Are you simply looking for a couple of layout options of what hangars and taxi lanes and development could look like at your airport? Or are you truly in a growth phase where you don't know what is going to be happening? And Oklahoma, you know, if you go back to the 1990s, the late 90s, when we did our last system plan before the most recent one that we just published a couple of months ago, we had a lot of airports that were in that growth phase. They're doing runway extensions, really expanding rapidly from growth of the metro areas. And so master plans were needed. But nowadays we have maybe, I could probably count on one hand, maybe two airports that would be eligible for an extension or growth opportunities. We're kind of in the sustainment possibilities right now. We're sustaining and allowing airports to grow within their boundaries as opposed to having to expand their boundaries. And so make sure that you have that planning document right size that you're wanting to go after. Is it a terminal area study? Is it a narrative that's just updating your ALD? Or it just could be some simple drawings that you're going to need. And that's one of the things that we're looking at is if a community just wants some hangar layout options to be able to, you know, send to their city council for approval, if someone wants to come build a private hangar, we can go do that a lot cheaper than it is to have to do a full-blown master plan or ALD update with narrative. And so that's kind of the term that I've been using here the last few years is right size your planning initiative and ask yourself the question before you go into it. Why are you doing a planning effort? What's the goal what's the goal you want to get out of that effort? Because if you just go into it saying, hey, I want to do planning, at the end of the day, you may just end up with that expensive paperweight and not really sure what you're going to do with it. You know, master plan's great. It's a nice shiny document, but you have to ask yourself, what are you going to do with that planning effort for the next 5-10 years? Are you going to put it to work, or are you going to collect dust on the shelf? And so that's kind of what we're trying to figure out here in Oklahoma is what is that right size for the different airports. And I think our new system plan that we just published is going to be very helpful for that. Is to this caliber and level of airport needs this, that caliber and airport level needs that. And we'll kind of wander down that path here for the next couple of years and see how planning takes hold in Oklahoma for the foreseeable future.
Thank you, Grayson. I appreciate that. The right sizing project, I think that really resonates, at least with me, whether we're talking about master plans or a business plan, ALP narrative report. And so Jim, kind of similar question, and I've got a follow-up question on statewide system plan. So if you could hold off on that one and we'll cover it next.
Yeah, so reiterating what Grayson said, I mean, he hit the nail on the head. One of the things we're doing right now is developing kind of a project development or scoping checklist for planning studies to really help our sponsors and our planners collaboratively work together to identify the right project. Does it need to be a full-blown master plan, or is it just an ALP update? Is it a feasibility study? Is it a terminal plan? You know, what is that right project? And based on all the factors, and asking the question why? Why do you think you want this? Why do you think you need this? What is it we're trying to accomplish? And now, you know, going back to your other part of your question, Craig, about what role does planning projects play? You know, I think I'm a little biased. I know Jane is the director of planning and programming as well. You know, I think the planning process is the most important part of what we do. Not because it's the sexiest, you know, it's not construction, but if we don't get it right in planning, every phase after that is set up to fail. We don't want to be pitching problems over the fence to design, engineering, operations, maintenance. So it's really critical that we're, again, like Grayson said, asking the right questions and getting the right sized plan on the front end. We're doing it right, and we're setting our sponsors up for success, because ultimately that's going to be what we then take as eligible, justified, and feasible projects to ask for FAA money. And we can then defend those at the local level when we're asking for local support for local match, and really use those planning studies and everything that comes out of it as actionable intelligence. And then once we get into design, construction, and project implementation, we know that we did everything right on the front end. We did everything we can, and 10% more effort, 10% more money on the planning side of things can save, you know, 100 times that on the design and construction. So it is really critical. Again, I admit I'm biased about the planning side of things, but it's, you know, if we don't get it right, we're setting everybody else up for failure.
Thank you. Very good. And Jane. anything to add?
Absolutely. I love planning. So I do. But we in our state, kind of like Grayson, what we do, it's not a one size fits all. So if an airport comes and said, I need a master plan, we will scale it down to sometimes do an action plan. What we've really been encouraging our airports to do, and I know this is coming on later with the 163, but as part of the master plan or action plan or whatever is updating their Exhibit A. We have a lot of Exhibit A's that are very old. And so we consider that as part of the planning process into the action or master plan. And what we use a lot, the action and when I say action, it's just a smaller version of a master plan. But what we use those a lot is to get the CIP step for my very small communities where the airport is unmanned and the mayor is the one who's running the airport. It's, hey, this is your plan for the next 5 years. It's not run by the consultant, it's not run by the state, it's a community effort, but it helps them in knowing what, because a lot of communities, they want a runway extension, and at least it's, hey, no, guys, you can't have it, this is why, and we have the backup documentation for it. And the other thing we use it for is, like Jim said, justification for FAA projects. I know we get to the state system plan stuff later, but some stuff, you know, it just doesn't make financial sense to completely relocate a runway at an airport that only has 300 operations. You know, so it's to cover our, yes, you're out of standard this way, but this is why we're not doing it. So we do a lot of planning in our state, and yeah, it's super fun.
Very good. And then finally, I'll throw it back over to Mike.
Yeah, I just want to add that, you know, our program managers do a really good job of you know, in Grayson's terms of right sizing the planning documents that we need. I know there's been a push in our office to have a lot of the airport layout plans and the narrative reports for some of our smaller airports updated. And then, you know, a lot of the larger airports, you know, they push towards a larger full-blown master plan. But of course, from the planning effort of it, I think there are, you know, with so many changes in mayors or the councils of sponsors and all, it gives them a document that they can go look at and see what, you know, at least what direction that they want to proceed, and, you know, instead of kind of a pie in the sky, you know, a wish list. So it's a really important document that you know, we try to make sure that we have for all of our airports.
Very good. Thank you, everybody, so much. Well, and of course, I didn't ask Stacy, see if Stacy has anything to input on that as well. Obviously, the role of planning and what it's used for from the FAA's end.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing I'll add is just what we're required by statute, which the law says, 49 U.S.C. 47107 says an airport sponsor has to have an up-to-date airport layout plan. So that for us is what's required for a grant to move forward. And I think kind of going back to what Jane was just saying, that if we have the small airports and you know, we want to make sure that what's on that ALP is, you know, we're matching it with the Exhibit A, you know, we're matching it with any, you know, with you know, if they have a master plan, you know, what their master plan says it's going to look like and what it currently looks like. But, you know, when we go out to the airport, we want that ALP to reflect what's on the airport. And of course, it can plan ahead, you know, it can say this is where this is going to sit. But that's really, to me, the planning document that's required by the FAA, you know, for the grant assurances. And what I think, going back to again what Jane said, that tells a good story.
Very good, thank you. And Stacy, can we all jot you down as a resource for the laws and statutes if we ever need to know something? If we need a source, can we list you as that?
Yes, absolutely.
Excellent. I'm extremely impressed with how you know and can quote chapter and verse on all of that. So just as a follow-up question, and Jane kind of mentioned this on the Exhibit A's, old Exhibit A's, sometimes the land acquisition tables are not up to date. And meets and bounds aren't there. And so what I've seen in the past is if there's an ALP update, there's not necessarily money budgeted to go and do all of that researching to update the Exhibit A, that's maybe more left to the sponsor to do. I guess for the folks out here in the state agencies, is that the expectations, or are y'all helping to fund some of that research to get the Exhibit A up to date? Toss it out, Jane, since you mentioned Exhibit A's.
Yeah, absolutely. We have also funded, we have a lot of airports, I'm sure, like other states, that are surplus land. And so they need to release it. So we've actually just done studies to gather all that information, when it was released, all of that. So yeah, at the state level, if it's a big enough thing like a surplus land, we'll do its own study for it. But if not, we just make sure to add it into the scope of work for the consultant if they're either updating the ALP or doing an action plan.
Okay, Jim, how about Texas?
Yeah, I think Jane nailed it. It's whether it's 163 or land release, again, with a lot of surplus property in Texas and just thousands of acres per airport that is not necessarily needed for aeronautical. It's really important for us to get a handle on those parcels and the federal obligations associated with them, how they were acquired. Because when an airport does have that need to release land, or that desire to release land or to change its use, to have those elements taken care of, that land taken care of, expedites a process that by itself is already pretty long, 12 to 18 months to get a determination like that done. No need in adding 4, 5, 6 additional months on top of that. So it's whether it's leveraging the planning process, or we also have indefinite deliverable contracts on calls for just this purpose, for researching for Exhibit A and land and all that. So we're any opportunity we have to get a better picture of what's happening with our airports from that perspective, we're all about it.
Okay, very good. Grayson.
Yeah, we've discussed this going back even before Section 163 showed up, of how can we, there's talks about a statewide system plan just to do Exhibit A's for all of our airports. That never really got around to it because of cost and scale, but it's been a topic of conversation for years, because we've seen it time and time again. Airports trading land, selling land within the city, and then we're catching it on the back door as opposed to trying to help them through the front door and doing it right. And so I will say it's gotten better here in the last 5 years, than more so in the early 2000s. And so I don't know what the magic bullet is moving forward, other than keeping airports and their leaders apprised that this is not a quick turnaround process, especially because typically when someone's trying to release land, it's usually due to an economic development initiative. And, those things are supposed to happen yesterday, as where this process is going to happen, millennium from now in the economic development age. So, yeah.
Okay. And then Mike.
Yeah, we've funded, I know mainly through updates to ALPs and all, but we do try to help the airports, as needed going forward for updating those. But it's quite a document that in a lot of cases from some of our airports, they may be old, and we're trying to get the latest information to assist them. And sometimes, when the funding is lacking in their funding area, we just say it might be better for us to help them out and put it in the scope.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to move into another question, and I originally slated this for Jim, but I'm going to have Jim weigh in second, and haven't put Mike in the hot seat yet for the first response to a question. So we'll throw it your way. But does your state region maintain a statewide system plan, or maybe statewide pavement management plans? And what roles do those plans play in managing the system and allocation of grant funding, if any?
So yeah, we actually have a system plan. We are currently we're in the process of updating that system plan, and We also have a pavement management plan. Both of those documents we refer to quite regularly, and from the planning aspect of things is, you know, our program managers and I should say the entire staff pretty much refer back to both those documents in order to help from a you know, planning aspect. And then, you know, in the case of a pavement management system, not just the planning moving forward, but what we're anticipating from a funding standpoint and potential grant allocation moving forward.
Very good. Thank you so much. And so, Jim, I wanted to throw this one over to you, given the process that Texas is currently going through, and just get your input on the role of the plan and how that plan is used.
Yeah, so we hadn't updated our system plan since about 2010. So the analysis and data that fed into that was probably 2008 data. We just late last year kicked off an update. So we are definitely in dire need of an updated system plan. I think I see 5 people who are actually on our project advisory committee who are on the call here today. So I appreciate it. But it's definitely time, and we're taking a very comprehensive look at our entire system, both our federal airports as well as our state airports. You know, there's going to be questions about facility needs throughout the state, and it's really going to set us up for success in the future, because just as there are more demands on our finances, on our financial resources due to rising construction costs, there's increased demands on our time and our resources from a non-financial perspective. And having a system plan with a project prioritization process in place and project evaluation and rankings and project development is going to be key. And then parallel to that, there's a lot of things we're doing internal to TxDOT, looking at the way we do things, because what worked 15 years ago, it's not going to work in the future. You know, where the aviation industry is changing, the funding programs are changing, there's new funding programs. So we have to think smarter, better, more efficiently than we have in the past. So really looking at how we can streamline a lot of our processes, automate a lot of what we do, and ultimately deliver a better service and product to our airports and ultimately our customers, the residents, businesses, and visitors of Texas. And I think that really starts with the system plan, is identifying what's our mission, what are our goals, what are our objectives, what are our performance measures, how are we going to measure success. I have it on one of my whiteboards. It says, what does success look like? Where are we going? Because if we don't know where we're going, we don't know what success looks like. We surely have no idea how to get there. So that's really something we're leaning on the system plan for, is to identify collectively where we're going as a state system, and then ultimately how we get there through implementation. And as a planner, I'll be the first one to say that plans are useless if you don't implement them. So we're really focusing on implementation this go around.
All right, very good. And I'm going to throw the same thing to you, Grayson. Get your input.
Yeah, we just wrapped our system plan update, first one since basically 1999. Obviously, a lot has changed between 99 and 2022 in the aviation world. Especially in Oklahoma, as I kind of mentioned earlier in one of the answers to my questions. Oklahoma went from a fairly rapid growth phase back in the late 90s, early 2000s to more we're now sustaining what we have here. And so the system plan, while still projecting growth and still energetic about the opportunities available at airports, wasn't necessarily as gung-ho or aggressive as probably 1999's was. We still had a dozen runway extensions we needed to do that were actually really hard needed, and probably another dozen and a half that could happen at that 99 timeframe. And here we're looking in this time frame, not nearly as many runway extensions, not nearly as many growth opportunities. One thing we have noticed in Oklahoma, though, although our pavement doesn't need to be expanded, it doesn't need to be strengthened. So while the business jet fleet across the country and across the world, the runway length may not be as big of an issue. Business jets are getting heavier and heavier. And so how do airport pavements accommodate that? And that's one struggle I think we found in Oklahoma. System plans, again, while great, like a master plan, if you don't implement them, if you don't pay attention to them, it's just a heavy paperweight. And so we want to use our system plan. In fact, we put it into a GIS format, so it could be updatable, it could be usable on a routine, regular basis. We wanted this to be a development tool for airports to be able to go out and help them sell their airport as a business development function. That's something we're really focused on here in Oklahoma, is economic development. And yes, our airports are meaning, their main means is transportation, but at the end of the day, we want to be able to see those airports succeed as economic development entities as well. So system plan, again, what success look like, as Jim mentioned, using that planning document. But if you have a opportunity in your state to do a system plan, I think it allows you to get together with all the assets that you have in your state to identify what you need and what you want to do to move forward for what your system is going to look like.
Thank you, Grayson, and we'll toss it over to Jane.
Yeah, so I use our system plan on a weekly basis. I'm old school where I print, well, I'm getting better, but I have sticky notes all over it. Like, it's such a great tool. We haven't updated ours since 2018, and so we'll probably do it again in a couple of years. But one of the things we like to do within our system plan is also do an economic impact portion of it, to give each of our airports like a sample brochure that they can give to their mayor, their council, or whoever, to show what the economic impact of that airport is. And then our pavement management plan, I think our engineers use it and the FAA use it more than our airports do. We're currently in the midst of updating, of re-inspecting all of our airports for our pavement management plan. But it's great because our region, they'll call me and say, hey, what's the PCN of this runway at this airport? Because they use it for funding, yeah, I just lost my word there. But anyway, we're in the midst of upgrading our pavement management plan and hopefully in the next couple of years, our system plan. So, and echoing, like everyone said, you have to implement it. You can't just let it sit on a shelf. So.
Very good. And I guess, Stacy, big picture for the region, do y'all have system-wide plans of your own that you use, or are you relying heavily on the states and the ADOs? How does that work on the FAA side?
Yeah, the FAA doesn't create system-wide plans. What the FAA publishes every 2 years is the NIPIA's publication. We used to call it report to Congress, but there's really no language in the law that says report. So we pulled that and now call it the NIPIA's publication. As I said, it's every 2 years. It's required by statute to be published every 2 years. And that's just that's the overview of the projects we see coming in, what we have in SOAR, that in our systems of airport reporting, that your ASIPs, your CIPs for your airports, what projects are coming in. So we put that into the NIPIA's publication. It comes out at the end of September, and I mean the end of September every year, because it has to go, be approved up all over the place. And it talks about how much we have in need for runway projects, for taxiway projects, what we've been spending on and prioritizing. So if you're looking for the FAA's overall picture, I certainly encourage a review of the NIPIA's publication. It's brilliantly done by a colleague of mine up in DC, who actually retired. So anyway, so it is brilliantly done. It gives a great overview of what projects the FAA is really focusing on. The other planning we use, for prioritization when it comes to discretionary, we're required by law to use a national priority ranking. So if you've seen the NIPIA's ASIP order, you know what it looks like, and you know how projects are scored. So it's very transparent. Highly encourage you to use the NIPIA's ASIP order. Read it if you haven't. It's FAA order 5090.5. And it talks about how FAA does planning in conjunction with sponsors. It's an FAA document. It's for FAA employees, but anybody can look at it and kind of peek in to see how FAA is planning. So those are the two documents I would encourage sponsors to take a look at to sort of see how FAA is going. The other thing I just kind of want to go back to, I'm sorry, when talking about Exhibit A's and whatnot, it has not been enforced, but there's a part of the grant assurances or grant agreements, and it's actually statutory, that requires whenever a land parcel is acquired, that the title be recorded, the deed be recorded before land grants can be drawn down. So that's actually a statutory requirement. I don't know if you guys were aware of that or not, but it's also in your grant agreements. And then just to go real quickly to Jane, they're asking for your PCI because we're getting asked by headquarters for the PCI. So they just want to make sure that every few years we have something up to date. It's new. That's probably why you're going, what the heck? So it is new. So that's where we're
The
getting it
great
from.
thing is it's on our website. I'm like, just go to nmaviation.org and look at the PMP program, but it's also good to talk to our FAA people, so I don't mind.
Yeah, and it's usually like somebody calling going, what's your PCI for that airport before we push the grant up to OST? So
Yep.
Connecting those dots. So it was mentioned, and I want to bring up section 163 of the FAA reauthorization of 2018. So this maybe not something that I'm very familiar with. We've been seeing something as related to hangars shown on ALPs and a process that's being required. And so I'll go through this, and then hopefully we can get some feedback from y'all. But section 163 was intended to remove previous FAA authority to regulate certain real property and related transactions at federally obligated airports. We have recently seen the requirement for a new hangar constructed on existing airport property and shown on the ALP required to go through the section 163 oversight process. This specific example appears to be relatively new in terms of what we're seeing at airports. So if anybody could provide any insight as to that requirement, and maybe Stacy, we can start with you.
yeah, sure. So section 163, as most of you probably are aware, has two parts to it. One part's been codified and the other part wasn't. And the part that wasn't codified is what's causing a lot of questions on how to implement it. And we know what the intent was. The intent was that if the property wasn't purchased with federal funds, that it can be an easier release from aviation use, right? That's the intent of it. And there's a lot of good that comes with that, but kind of going back to what Jason said earlier, we don't know. We don't know how land was acquired. So it has been quite the monumental task to determine. One of the issues is sometimes we call it the zombie land provision. I don't know if you guys, anybody remembers ADAP and FAP or read about ADAP and FAP, because none of us here were clearly alive when ADAP and FAP was out there. They were the old grant provisions, grant programs in the FAA years and years and decades ago. And they died when AIP came along in 1982. The other programs, they died. They didn't have anything further obligating. Well, guess what? Section 163 brought them back to life. That's why we call it the zombie provision. So those now we have to go back and look and see, and the records are terrible. So that is the problem with 163. We don't have that accurate accounting, as you guys have been mentioning, on who owns what on the property. So it is difficult to implement 163 in that respect. I honestly, looking at this question, I don't know what the situation is, so I can't really speak to this specifically. What I can tell you is that if there's going to be a non-aeronautical use of property that's been identified as aeronautical use, you have to do your release, right, from aeronautical use if it was federally funded or surplus or whatnot. But if it wasn't, that's where 163 comes into play.
Craig, quick question. Was this a private hangar that was being built on airport property, public hangar being built? What are some more details on this particular project?
Sure. And so my understanding when it was brought to my attention was that it was a public hangar. It's not necessarily a private hangar. It's a hangar that is to be built on a ground lease, 20-year, 30-year ground lease held by the airport. It's on airport property. My understanding was an area that was shown for aviation use, and it is an aviation use hangar. But they were told they needed to go through section 163. It ended up being not a long drawn out process. I think it ended up being relatively short, but when it first came up, it raised some flags. So I don't know if that helps.
If it was going to be what is considered a long-term lease, you know, lease of more than 20 years, that could sometimes amount to a release of the property. But again, if it's aeronautical use, that's, yeah, hopefully it was smooth after the lease arrangement. You know, I mean, it's going to revert back to it's always airport property. It's maybe a long-term lease, but it's still airport property. So, and if it was already aeronautical, it should have, it shouldn't have been an issue.
Right. And I think ultimately maybe it didn't end up being an issue. It just was another checkbox in the process that maybe they hadn't had to go through before, years before. So maybe not the best worded question on my part, but I'll throw it out to anybody else, Jim or Jane or Mike, if y'all have had any experience or anything that you'd like to input on this.
Yeah, you know, I think we've all kind of collectively been trying to wrap our heads around this. You know, I think the requirement, the 163 requirement, was perhaps rolled out a little prematurely before anybody in the industry had a full grasp of exactly how to handle it. I know that I think probably last month, new policy closed, you know, in the Federal Register. So I think it's still an evolving process. What we've been trying to do is implement the KISS, keep it simple, stupid method here, you know, not try to overcomplicate it. I think we're overthinking it to some extent, that it's not necessarily as circuitous and as difficult as the general perception seems to be. So we're just continuously working with our partners to identify what's the most efficient way. I think leveraging the planning process. Jane mentioned, you know, getting Exhibit A's and land lockdown. One of the things we're actually recommending to our airports in the planning process moving forward is a 163 matrix, where we basically say for every project that we're identifying in this planning study, let's think about the 163 side of things, and we basically can, you know, get 85% of the way through the 163 determination as part of the planning process. And then when it comes to actually pulling the trigger on the project, we just vet it, make sure nothing has changed. We've got, you know, pre-approval essentially, you know, you're pre-approved, and we can move forward much more quickly than we can if with these, you know, off the cuff, shooting from the hip 163 requests that we get across the state. So okay. I think it's just an evolving process, and we're all kind of collectively working together to learn what's working, what's not working, efficiencies we can build into how we do things, how we approve and review, and ultimately get to the right process.
If I could just add, so one of the reasons that 163 had to go so quickly is Congress is all over it, as you know. And another alphabet group, to remain nameless, but I think you guys know it begins with an A, actually wrote this language. And that's how it got into the legislation. So when I say part of it was codified, and that's the easier part, and part of it wasn't, it was this is the part that wasn't codified is what everybody's tripping over, because we are getting reports from folks saying, nope, this is what the intent was. And it's like, well, this is what it says. So there's a lot of back and forth still with the organization that lobbied to get it in. So it is not, you know, no. I wish it was just the one part that was codified. We could all get that nice and simple. But unfortunately, the other part is where, well, what is this referring to? What part of the law is this based in? That's where we get back to the zombie provisions. You know, that's not something that anybody wants to deal with. Those were dead. We wanted them to stay dead. So hopefully it'll get smoothed out. And I know more, I've heard more legislation is coming. Hopefully there'll be some codification in the next appropriate or authorization.
Thank you, Stacy. Jane or Mike, anything that y'all would like to add on this topic?
No, just echoing what Jim and Stacy said. I mean, the issue we've been having is there's been no consistency and absolute confusion. And that goes back to what Stacy was saying, which it wasn't codified. So we know what the intent was, but that's not what's happening. So we're just kind of rolling with the punches and doing what we can, and hopefully we'll get this figured out in the next authorization.
Very good. And anything from you, Mike?
No, I was just going to say we're waiting for that clarity of of how it's going to come out.
Very good. So we are an hour and 12 minutes in, and I see our participants are slowly starting to drop off. So I think we can close it on our end. I'll open it to our panel. Any closing thoughts that y'all would like to add, starting with you, Jane?
No, I mean, I think this was once again a super great panel. And just I hope to see, thank you for organizing it, Craig and Frank, for kind of starting this a while back. And I hope to see all of your smiling faces at the conference in Hearst at the end of February, beginning of March. So hope to see you guys there.
Absolutely. Grayson.
Yeah, look forward to seeing everybody here in a month and a half or so. It's been quite the time, going on 3.5, almost 4 years now, since we last had one of those events. So looking forward to that. And certainly looking forward to getting some infrastructure dollars put down on the good earth of Oklahoma here this year. So
Very good.
talk to y'all soon.
Mike in Louisiana.
We're looking forward to the conference as well, and I appreciate the invite onto the panel.
Glad to have you. And Jim.
No, looking forward to seeing everybody in 6 or 7 weeks here. Introduce everyone to what real barbecue is here in Texas. Welcome you to our state. Bring you, get you some good Dr. Pepper. We're also the home of Dr. Pepper. Don't forget that. And I think by the time that conference, the New York Giants will be Super Bowl champions. The Cowboys will have lost to the 49ers, and we'll all be happy. So.
Yeah, that half of the bracket is full of NFC East teams, that's for sure there. So, and Stacy, we really appreciate the FAA being part of this. Any closing comment from you?
I just kind of want to go back to what Grayson said. So far, my little over a year here, you guys are the best region. Absolutely. I'm happy to be in Southwest. Just a quick little thing. I did move to Texas, but I have no idea about football. I'm a hockey person and a baseball person. We got Aaron Judge locked down 9 years. That's all I'm going to say.
Well, I'm speaking to you from Houston, and so go Yankees.
I'm banging on my trash can right now. Boom, boom, boom.
I want to thank all of y'all for being on the panel. Greatly appreciate y'all giving up your time. You're not taking off your checklist on the whiteboards. So very much appreciative of your time and appreciate the chapter for hosting these conversations. So thank you all so much. Look forward to the next one.
Bye,
Thank you,
everybody.
everyone.
See you soon.
Thanks, Craig.
Bye.